Beck Weathers was left for dead twice on May 10, 1996. He'd paid $65,000 to climb Everest, and now he lay frozen at 8,600 meters, his corneas frozen solid, his body shutting down. The storm that killed 8 climbers that day had moved on, and Weathers was just another body on the mountain until 18 hours later when he somehow stood up and walked back to camp. Everest doesn't kill with avalanches, it kills with stupidity. Most deaths aren't from the mountain, they're from preventable mistakes. We're examining the catastrophic errors climbers make, from ignoring turnaround times to trusting their oxygen-starved brains. The pattern is clear. Ego and exhaustion turn the world's most climbed 8,000-meter peak into a graveyard. The turnaround time gamble. The 2:00 p.m. rule exists for one reason: summit after this, and you descend in darkness with depleted oxygen and exhausted muscles. The math is brutal. Oxygen tanks are calculated for specific time frames. Push past turnaround, and you run out during descent when you need it most. 80% of Everest deaths happen going down, when hypoxia impairs judgment and exhaustion turns simple tasks into life or death calculations. The mountain didn't change. The time did. The 1996 disaster remains the textbook example. Rob Hall's adventure consultants team summited at 3:40 p.m., nearly 2 hours past their hard cutoff. The blizzard hit at 5:00 p.m. By 6:00 p.m., visibility dropped to 0. Temperatures plummeted to -40 degrees Celsius. 8 people died. Hall himself spent a night exposed near the south summit, radioing base camp with his final words, "Please don't leave me." His client, Doug Hansen, a postal worker who'd saved for years to afford the climb, died somewhere on the ridge. The storm didn't kill them. The clock did. Summit fever overrides rational thought. At sea level, a climber can assess risk logically. At 8,800 meters with 30% oxygen saturation, the brain functions at the equivalent of 0.08% blood alcohol. That's legally drunk in most countries. Climbers convince themselves 30 more minutes won't matter. They see the summit. They feel fine. They forget that every minute spent ascending is 2 minutes stolen from descent. The death zone above 8,000 meters gives humans a maximum 48-hour window before irreversible damage begins. Most summit pushes spend 12 to 18 hours in this zone. The body consumes itself, muscle tissue breaks down, brain cells die, decision-making collapses. Why do guides break their own rules? Commercial pressure. Reputable operators charge $45,000 to $100,000 per climber. Budget outfits offer $30,000 to $35,000. The difference isn't just price, it's safety margins. But even expensive operators face the same calculus. A guide's reputation depends on summit success rates. Clients who've trained for a year and invested their life savings don't want to hear "turn around" when the summit is visible. The guide who makes that call risks negative reviews, lost bookings, and financial ruin. So they push. They let the clock slide. They gamble that the weather window will hold. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. The 2023 season proved the system is still broken. 20 climbers died. 12 were first-time 8,000-meter climbers using budget operators. These weren't mountaineers with decades of high-altitude experience. They were clients who'd succeeded on Kilimanjaro or Aconcagua and assumed Everest was just higher. They learned too late that the death zone is fundamentally different. Technical climbing skill doesn't translate to altitude tolerance. Genetic factors determine who gets haze and who doesn't. No amount of gym training prepares lungs for 30% oxygen saturation. By the time climbers realize something is wrong, the decision is already made. The cheap operator lottery. The price gap on Everest isn't subtle. Reputable Western operators charge $45,000 to $100,000. Established Nepali companies run $36,000 to $45,000. Then there are the Kathmandu budget outfits offering $30,000 to $35,000. If you're shopping for Everest like a flight ticket, you're already dead. What you lose for $15,000 is invisible until you need it. Experienced Sherpas who've summited 10+ times and can recognize high-altitude cerebral edema before the victim can. Reliable oxygen systems with redundant regulators and backup bottles staged at Camp 3 and 4. satellite communication systems that can call a helicopter from base camp, proper acclimatization schedules that don't rush you into the death zone to save on logistics costs. The fatality rate correlation is stark. Reputable operators maintain death rates below 1%. Budget operators run 3 to 5 times higher. In 2019, every single climber who died had booked with a budget operator. In 2023, 12 of the 17 deaths were first-time 8,000-meter climbers using cut-rate companies. The pattern isn't random, it's arithmetic. The oxygen gamble is the most immediate threat. Cheap operators provide the legal minimum, 4 bottles for the summit push. Reputable companies provide 6 to 8. At 8,000 meters, 1 bottle lasts 4 to 6 hours at a standard flow rate of 2 liters per minute. If your regulator ices up, and they do in minus 40-degree temperatures, you're down to 3 bottles for a descent that requires 4. If you get stuck in traffic for 2 hours, you burn through your reserve while standing still. At that altitude, running out of oxygen isn't an inconvenience. It's a death sentence that arrives in minutes. Sherpa experience matters more than most clients realize. An experienced Sherpa can look at a climber's gait and spot ataxia, the stumbling, drunken walk that signals haste. They know when a headache is just a headache and when it's the first sign of cerebral swelling. They can read wind patterns on the ridge and predict a storm 6 hours before it hits. Inexperienced Sherpas hired by budget operators for half the wage miss these signals. They can't recognize when a client is deteriorating because they haven't seen enough climbers deteriorate. They make poor route decisions because they're following a GPS track, not reading the mountain. The 2012 case study proves the point. 4 climbers died in a single day, all from the same budget operator. Inadequate oxygen supply meant 2 climbers ran out at 8,600 meters. No rescue coordination meant no one knew they were in trouble until they were already dead. The Sherpas, inexperienced and under-equipped, abandoned clients above 8,000 meters when conditions worsened. The clients had paid $32,000 each. They saved $20,000. They paid with their lives. Everest is the only place on Earth where cutting corners turns money into a liability. Hidden costs turn budget. Climbs into financial disasters. Nepal mandated rescue insurance in 23, requiring $10,000 coverage. Budget operators often skip it or buy minimal policies that don't cover helicopter evacuation above 7,000 meters. When a climber collapses at Camp 4, the helicopter can't reach them. The evacuation requires a $70,000 long-line rescue from Camp 2. If the insurance doesn't cover it, the bill lands on the climber's family. Many can't pay. The climber stays on the mountain. This mistake kills people every single season. Unclipping in the death zone. The Hillary Step is a 12-meter rock face at 8,790 meters. Before the 2015 earthquake altered it, this single obstacle created hours-long traffic jams in the death zone. Climbers would queue for 30, 60, sometimes 90 minutes while their oxygen hissed away. The step forces everyone onto the same line of fixed ropes, moving at the pace of the slowest person. At sea level, a traffic jam is an annoyance. At 8,790 meters, it's a death trap. The deadly shortcut seems simple. Unclip from the fixed rope, sidestep around the bottleneck, clip back in farther up. It takes 30 seconds. It saves an hour of waiting. Guides do it. Experienced climbers do it. The math feels obvious until the wind hits. The rope isn't there to slow you down. It's there to keep your body on the mountain. On May 21st, 2014, 2 climbers unclipped to bypass a stalled group near the summit. A gust caught them at 200 kilometers per hour. Without the rope, there was nothing to arrest the fall. They tumbled 2,400 vertical meters down the Kangshung face into Tibet. Their bodies were never recovered. The mountain doesn't offer second chances at that altitude. Unclip once and you're no longer climbing. You're gambling. A guide from a reputable Western operator admitted off record. It's not uncommon. We tell clients to stay clipped, but when you've got 20 minutes of oxygen left and an hour-long queue, you make calculations. Those calculations kill. The problem isn't just the individual decision, it's the cascade effect. One climber unclips to maintain pace. The gap in the rope grows. The climber behind unclips to close it. Within minutes, an entire section of the Hillary step becomes unprotected. Everyone is gambling that their balance, their crampons, their cold-numbed hands won't fail. Exhaustion compounds the risk. At 8,000 meters, cognitive function drops 40%, judgment equivalent to legal intoxication. Climbers can't assess risk accurately because the organ assessing risk is literally dying from oxygen deprivation. They feel fine. They feel strong. They don't realize the hypoxia has already made the decision for them. Modern solutions have failed. After the 2015 earthquake, the Hillary Step's geometry changed, but the problem didn't. More fixed ropes were installed. Permits increased. In 2023, the season saw 600-plus summit attempts in a single week. The mountain became a conveyor belt of bodies moving up and down the same narrow ridge. More ropes didn't solve the math. Each climber uses 5 to 6 oxygen bottles for a summit push. Each hour of delay burns through reserves faster. Wait 2 hours and you're trying to descend on 3 bottles when you need 5. The body doesn't negotiate. It shuts down. The unclipping mistake is unique because it feels like competence. It feels like experience. The veteran climber who sidesteps the rope isn't being reckless. They're being efficient. They've done it before. They know the move. But the death zone doesn't care about your resume. It cares about whether you're attached to something when the wind hits 200 kilometers per hour. And the wind always hits. The hypoxia trap. At 8,800 meters, your confidence is a symptom. Hypoxia doesn't announce itself. It erodes judgment until climbers can't recognize they're dying. Above 8,000 meters, the human body begins to consume itself. Muscle tissue breaks down for fuel. Brain cells die from oxygen starvation. The organ responsible for making life or death decisions is the first organ to fail. The death zone physiology is relentless. At sea level, blood oxygen saturation hovers near 98%. At Everest summit, it drops to 30%. The heart compensates by pumping faster, but above 8,000 meters, the heart itself begins to strain. Capillaries leak fluid into the lungs and brain. The digestive system shuts down. Food becomes useless weight. The body cannibalizes muscle mass to feed vital organs. This isn't exhaustion, it's systematic cellular collapse. And the cruelest part is that hypoxia impairs the brain's ability to recognize it's impaired. Francys Arsentiev's story is what happens when the brain doesn't recover. In May 1998, she became the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. She stood on top at 9 o'clock a.m. By noon, she was disoriented. By 2 o'clock p.m., she couldn't walk unassisted. At 8,600 meters, she collapsed. Her husband, Sergei, had descended ahead to fetch oxygen. When he returned, he found her barely conscious. He spent hours trying to drag her down, burning through his own reserves. He died in the attempt. Francys spent the night exposed at 8,600 meters. Other climbers found her the next morning, still alive but incoherent, paralyzed from the cold. Her last words, repeated to anyone who stopped, "Don't leave me here to die." They had to. At that altitude, rescuing an immobile climber means 2 deaths, not 1. Her body remained visible on the ridge for 9 years, nicknamed Sleeping Beauty by those who passed. She'd achieved her dream and paid for it with her life, all because she couldn't recognize the symptoms that were killing her. The cognitive impairment data is stark. Climbers at 8,000 meters score equivalent to 0.08% blood alcohol on decision-making tests. That's legally drunk. But unlike alcohol, hypoxia doesn't feel impairing. It feels like clarity. Climbers report feeling stronger than ever just before they collapse. The brain, starved of oxygen, can't assess its own deterioration. This is why the "I'm just tired" fallacy kills. A headache seems normal. The stumbling gait seems like fatigue. The confusion seems like stress. By the time a climber admits something is wrong, they're often too far gone to descend under their own power. Sherpas watch this happen constantly. They see clients who summited successfully the day before now unable to remember how to clip a carabiner. They issue warnings. "You need to descend." The client argues. They've paid $65,000. They've trained for a year. They feel fine. The Sherpa must choose: physically force a client down, risking assault accusations and lost tips, or let them continue and hope they survive. Most choose the latter. The mountain collects its debt. The 48-hour survival window is absolute. Above 7,500 meters, the human body has a maximum of 48 hours before irreversible damage. Most summit pushes spend 12 to 18 hours in the death zone. Push past 24 hours and organ failure begins. Push past 36 and survival requires evacuation by helicopter or a miracle. Push past 48 and you're not coming down intact, if at all. On Everest, the summit isn't the goal. The descent is. And the clock decides whether you get one. Everest doesn't reward bravery. It rewards restraint. By the time you trust your instincts on Everest, they've already betrayed you. The experience gap. You don't learn to swim by jumping into the open ocean. Everest is the deepest water on Earth. The dumbest mistake isn't hypoxia or bad gear. It's showing up unprepared. Everest is the most climbed 8,000-meter peak on Earth, and that creates a dangerous illusion. Because hundreds summit each year, inexperienced climbers assume it's easy. The mountain becomes a trophy, not a test. The commercial era changed everything. In the 1990s, guided expeditions exploded. Clients arrived with zero high-altitude experience, paying to be dragged to the summit. Beck Weathers is the textbook case. He had 10 years of climbing experience, but zero peaks above 6,000 meters. He paid $65,000 to learn 8,000-meter mountaineering in the death zone itself. His survival was luck, not validation of the system. Technical skill doesn't translate. Some bodies produce more red blood cells, some don't. There's no training protocol that guarantees adaptation. You either have it or you don't, and you don't find out which until you're already in the death zone. The Sherpa dependency makes this worse. Clients rely entirely on guides for route finding, weather assessment, and oxygen management. When Sherpas make mistakes, clients die. But inexperienced Sherpas, hired by budget operators, can't read the mountain. They miss the early signs of haze. They push through weather warnings. They follow GPS tracks instead of reading the ridge. The client, trusting their life to experience, doesn't realize they're being led by someone who's summited twice, not 20 times. The training illusion is part of the problem. Months of gym work, stair machines, and running don't prepare lungs for 30% oxygen saturation. You can be fit and still die. The only meaningful preparation is time at altitude. Multiple 6,000-meter peaks, then 7,000, then maybe an 8,000. But commercial expeditions sell a shortcut. They tell clients that their fitness regimen is enough. It's not. Ego completes the circuit. Climbers who've succeeded on lower peaks believe they understand the game. They don't realize that the death zone changes the rules. The mountain doesn't care about your 7 summits. It cares about your oxygen saturation and your decision-making capacity at the moment of crisis. And that moment always comes during descent. The moral question hangs over the industry. Should operators refuse clients who lack high-altitude experience? Currently, the system prioritizes profit. A $65,000 fee is hard to turn down, even if the client is a gamble. Some operators, reputable ones, do refuse. They require previous 8,000-meter experience. They demand medical screenings. They turn away climbers who aren't ready. But for every ethical operator, there's a budget company ready to take the check. The result is a conveyor belt of bodies. Some summit, some die. The mountain collects its fee either way. Everest kills through human error more than natural hazard. Turnaround times, cheap operators, unclipping, hypoxia, inexperience, every mistake is preventable. But ego and summit fever override rational thought in the death zone. The mountain doesn't take you with one big blow. It takes you in minutes, through small errors that compound into catastrophe. Money doesn't buy immunity. Which mistake do you think kills the most people, and why? Subscribe for more untold stories of the world's deadliest peaks.